Alright, so today I want to make a video on the myth of systemic racism. Now, this is something that's been in the news a lot lately, and most of these politicians and mainstream media outlets are pretending like it's a real thing, even though it objectively is not. Now, the first thing I want to make clear is that I don't believe, and I don't think the overwhelming majority of people who are think that the systematic racism isn't a thing are saying that there is no such thing as racism against blacks. No one is saying that. All we're saying is that the idea that it is more likely is not true, and it is simply not true, and the numbers simply bear that out. And I mean, things like this just back that up. So this is from Larry Elder, who is a very good follow if you don't follow him already. Um, and he has a chart here, or he links, or he shows it, sorry, in that homicides committed by blacks. This is from 2015, interracial homicides. 500 blacks killing whites, and whites killing blacks 229. Now, whites are what, 3-4 times more, higher percent of the population. So the only way that there is the idea of systematic racism makes sense is if whites are literally, let's just assume blacks still kill 500. Whites would have to be killing like 2,000 blacks, and they're actually killing like 229. So whites, they're actually way underrepresented, and blacks are way overrepresented. Now, there's other stats that show this too, and that the one that they constantly bring up too is about the police, and that, okay, blacks are 25, or sorry, 13% of the population, and they are 25% of the prison population. They're 25% of people arrested. Okay, and they'll use that as, oh, that's proof that blacks are being, their people are being racist against them. The cops are being racist against them. But what they don't tell you, and an easy way to debunk that is, okay, well, blacks, yeah, they're overrepresented for that, but they're way underrepresented for the when you compare to the murders. Like, blacks are 13% of the population. They're arrested 25%. They're 25% of the prison population, but they commit half the murders and half the violent crime. So if anything, they're underrepresented as far as being in prison goes. So that's the other. Those are the two things that just completely and blow the systemic racism, black racism being this massive issue in society out of the water. It completely blows it out of the water. Now, like I mentioned, I don't believe that there is no racism against blacks. Racism definitely exists, but it is not this huge, massive issue that is just a plague on society that the left and a lot of these politicians and the mainstream media is pretending. It is not true. It is objectively not true by these numbers. The only way that it would make sense is if the numbers in that situation were more than reversed. Like, more than reversed. Even if the numbers were reversed, it still wouldn't even be an example of racism. Even if the blacks, the prison stuff, those numbers would have to go up, way up as well. So if anything, they are underrepresented. And people probably are wondering, like a lot of more apolitical people, why do you care so much about this issue? Like, it doesn't really, why do you care so much about it? Well, the reason I care about it is that the majority of people's solution to their perceived problem is not going to fix the perceived problem. And the problem, if anything, will only get worse, because it's literally a classic example of trying to do the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. It is not going to work. We're going to have situations like this again, and they're going to turn around, oh, it's white racism. This is white racism, and there's going to be more rioting and more looting and more people getting killed. I mean, literally over 20 people have gotten killed from this. There's people that have been beat half to death. So the idea of this not being a negative on society is not true. Like, people are literally getting killed because of this. This is not people. There are people that are pretending that this doesn't affect them. Like, maybe, but maybe next time around you'll be one of the people that are killed. So pretending like it's not an issue is not something that's smart to do. Like, it is not smart, and it's just an example of someone who doesn't understand how to think critically. Because if it's not an issue, then if it's not an issue right now, that doesn't guarantee that it won't be an issue down the road. And because, people say, oh, it's largely a states thing. Well, that's also not true, because look at all the protests going on in Canadian cities. Even though Canada doesn't have a rampant history of racism, especially not against blacks. I mean, most of the racism in our history is largely not true, or at the very least misleading. Largely the stuff with the natives and whatnot, but I don't want to get into that right now because it was a whole separate video. But we don't have a rampant history of racism in Canada. If anything, we have the opposite. I mean, we had the Underground Railroad, all this kind of stuff. We do not. Was there some racism? Yes, but there was far more racism in other. Like, that's the other thing about slavery too. Like, and I know this is a bit of a rant, but I'm just talking about stuff as I think about it. Slavery went on pretty well every country for most of them much longer and on a larger scale than they did in the States. There was more whites enslaved throughout history than blacks. There was a lot more blacks that were enslaved in the Arab world. This is another thing too that I really cannot stand about people too, is that the first thing they think about when they hear slavery is this, in the States, even though slavery happened on a much, much larger scale in the Arab world and in Africa and in a lot of these other places. The reason is that the slaves in the States were treated a lot better, which is why you don't see a lot of black people in the Arab world now, is because most of them were castrated and a lot of them died because of it. And a lot of them were just flat out killed. The slaves in the States, yeah, where they were slaves, but they were treated a lot better than slaves traditionally were treated. And that's another thing that people like to deny as well, but it's just flat out not true. Now, not that, again, no one condone. I mean, no one with a brain condones slavery. But it is a simple fact that slaves in the southern states were treated better than other slaves in the world, and that's objectively, true. So basically, to sum it up here, the idea of systemic racism against blacks is just flat out not true. It's just flat out not true. And the numbers don't bear it out. Like, the numbers have overwhelmingly shown. I mean, we've known this for a while now too. Like, we've known this for like a decade, even more maybe. The reason for the suffering, I mean, in a nutshell, the reason for the suffering, the pain and suffering that goes on in the black community, is a result of the welfare state. It is a result, like I say, single parenthood, largely single motherhood. It is a result of people not graduating from high school. It is a result of people not getting jobs, all this kind of. And part of the reason too for that is a lot of rules and regulations too, like because the government is increasingly making minimum wage, not viable for people. Now again, it's just left this fantasy of infinite resources too. That the only way that a higher minimum wage than a $15 an hour minimum wage makes sense is if there's literally infinite resources. The problem is that there is a lot of people that aren't worth $15 an hour, and if you're someone who, let's say, I mean, an example, you're a black guy, you're maybe 19, 20 years old, you didn't graduate from high school, you have a criminal record, you are not worth $15 an hour, at least most of the time. And that goes for anyone too. If you're white, you have a criminal record, you didn't graduate from high school, it's the same thing. Um, you're probably not worth $15 an hour, and you may not even be worth 10. The thing is that you need to make it so these people can get jobs, because the only way to get a pay raise is to get job experience, or one of the main ways. If you can go to an employer and you don't have a high school education and you have a criminal record and be like, yeah, I worked at this place, I was a great worker, my bosses will tell me that, I was very productive, you are much more likely to get a job than if you didn't have that job in the first place. So a lot of these government regulations are the reason for the pain and suffering too. Like, you're a black guy or even a white guy, like I say, for example, in this situation, your options are fight and claw to get a crappy job, or just go be a drug dealer, go, be involved in gangs. Like, that is a much easier option and easier out than fighting and clawing with the system. Now again, I'm just using minimum wage as an example. All of these government regulations, they raise the bar to entry, and if you want to help these people, you need to lower the bar, the barrier to entry, because if you lower the barrier to entry, that gives employers more reason to take on these kind of people, because there's less risk. The less risk, the more likely they are to take these people on, and that is That is what we need as a society. We need these people to not be committing criminal activity. We need them working. We need them working, and that is a win-win for society, and that they get job skills. Down the road, they get a pay raise. They can, support a family rather than going, being in gangs, committing criminal activity, all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, that again, that's kind of in a nutshell. I don't want to make this video 30 minutes and get into all my reasonings behind that, but that is something we need to do if we want to fix this the pain and suffering of the black community. I mean, number one, stop pretending like race and IQ isn't a factor. That's something I brought up before, but stop pretending it's not a factor, because it is. Um, we need to get rid of the welfare state, or at the very least, make it much more stringent. We need to reduce regulations, lower the barrier to entry. This is the same thing for anyone too, but lower the barrier to entry. And again, I think those are the three biggest things that would benefit them. And the problem is that pretending like weeding out racism in the police force is going to fix the problem isn't the case. You'll save maybe, what, 10 people a year. Not that they don't matter, but compared to the thousands, the tens of thousands of people that are being killed and that are suffering because of all these crappy government policies, those people are they're nothing compared to the amount of people that are suffering because of the terrible government policies. So anyway, I'm gonna leave the video there. If you'd like to, make sure that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. I got linked in the description. Again, appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And last couple things, as always, check me out on Twitter if you haven't already, and check me out on BitChute. All the links are in the description, so you can find them all there.